We have made it to the final part of the offseason. It's the 2026 NFL Draft. Another opportunity for our St. Louis Dragons to add to the young core that we've built over the last 3 seasons. In the last episode, we had our full draft preview, really going in depth about all of the prospects in this year's draft class. In case you missed that episode or would like a refresher, I will leave a card at the top right of the screen for you to go ahead and check out. This draft class is going to be scaled a little bit differently compared to the first 2 in this series. There are more players in this draft who are rated higher, but there are less players with hidden development. This is because I want more rookies around the league to be really good right off the bat, but it's not like everybody's going to be able to develop super quickly now, and thus there's going to be a lot more players with normal development and less with star, superstar, or superstar X Factor. If you would like to download the draft class and are on the PS5, it is available on the draft class vault under the name Dragons Draft 3, all caps, no spaces, spelled as it is on screen. With a lot of people getting Madden or even a PS5 for the holidays, I think it's pretty good timing that the draft class is being uploaded now. And if you would like to use any of the first 3 draft classes of the series, type in my PSN, again, spelled as it is on screen, and you'll be able to use any of the draft classes we have thus far. We have 8 picks in this draft, including the 25th selection in the first round. We've got 2 picks in round 3, a handful of selections on day 3. And I think our roster's in a pretty good spot at the moment. We don't have many glaring needs other than probably safety, and I let that go on purpose because this is a loaded safety class. There's going to be plenty of guys up and down the board who can make an impact at the safety position. And with that, we will get started. The 2026 draft is on the clock, and the Buccaneers will pick first overall for the second time in 3 seasons. Are they going to look to build around their quarterback, Deacon Adderley, or will they look to replace him? With the first pick of the 2026 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Mimoni Tuliesi, offensive tackle out of Oregon. This was the expected pick by the Buccaneers here, number 1 overall. He's a 77 overall, which looks pretty good. If you scale that down to what he would be in one of the first 2 classes, it's more like a 74 or a 75 overall, but he does have hidden development, really impressive athlete, and the anchor of an Oregon offensive line who ultimately ended up winning the national championship with quarterback Stanley Cubbage Jr., who's expected to hear his name come off the board pretty soon. Dragan Markovic, edge rusher out of USC, is the second pick to the New York Jets. The Jets have torn it down. They traded away Quinnen Williams for another first-round pick in this year's draft, and they're going to look to add some more pass rushing help with Markovic. He's a 76 overall, but only normal development. Solid athlete, good run stopper. I think the raw pass rushing upside is there. His pass rushing toolbox could use some refinement, but I think he could be a really, really solid player down the line. The New England Patriots, 1 year removed from winning the Super Bowl, are now in the top 3. It's Isaiah Youngblood, the cornerback out of North Carolina, joining Derek Stingley and current Dragon Jeff Okudah as the only defensive backs to go in the top 3 over the last decade. Youngblood was the most consistent cover corner in the country this season. His stock really rose this year with the Tar Heels, and we know Bill Belichick loves his secondary pieces. Jabbar Julian out of Wisconsin is the 4th pick to the Chicago Bears. I think Chicago needs some more juice up front. Whether Julian lines out as an outside linebacker within the Bears' 3-4 scheme or as a defensive end, I think his burst and athleticism off the edge is going to be big for this defense, who needs some more game wreckers going after the quarterback. The Detroit Lions are on the board here, 5th overall. They select Vernon Rudisell, the linebacker out of Clemson. He's like a little cannonball just waiting to explode into the backfield with solid cover instincts. He's the first off-ball linebacker since, again, current Dragon, Devin White, to be selected in the top 5. With only being a 74 overall, I think you can argue this pick is a little bit of a reach, but I really like Rudisell's upside, and I think his skill set is a very fun one with his athleticism and well-roundedness as a run stopper and cover player. So out of the top 5 now, that'll bring us to the Denver Broncos, but not for long. This pick is on the move. Our first trade of the day, and it's the New York Football Giants looking to move up 4 spots, swapping some mid-rounders, including their 3rd, on the way to Denver. Could this be the first quarterback off the board? Yes, it will. Stanley Cubbage Jr. out of Oregon is a New York Giant. So the Giants make the big move. They get their quarterback of the future with Daniel Jones' underwhelming performance over the last few seasons, despite the Giants consistently winning a lot of games. Stanley Cubbage Jr. is a super fun player. He is a dynamic athlete, dynamic runner. He's got the arm talent. The accuracy can be a little bit inconsistent, though. Reminds me a lot of a guy like Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson coming out of college. Can he develop into the passer that a guy like Lamar Jackson has? And if he does, he's going to be a really fun player with the New York Giants. That'll bring us to the Houston Texans with the 7th pick, and they go with Pip Smalling, a defensive back out of Oklahoma State. Pip Smalling was the number 1 player on our draft board because he is an absolute beast. 83 overall, tied for the highest rated player in the entire draft. This kid is an absolute monster, and you can make the positional value argument that a safety shouldn't go in the top 7. But when they had the opportunity to be as much of a game breaker as Pip Smalling is, can you really question it? I think he's the best football player in the entire draft, and I think this is a phenomenal pick by the Houston Texans, looking to shore up the back end of their secondary. The New Orleans Saints, with the 8th pick, select Chuba Menger out of Michigan. Second straight season, the Saints have selected a Wolverine in the first round. Obviously, last year they drafted Callaghan October, their quarterback, number 1 overall. Manger's a really, really good run defender, and I think we've seen the improvements with him as a pass rusher. Impressive athlete as well, and I think he's going to be a really solid addition within the middle of the Saints' defense. They've been looking for their Cameron Jordan replacement, and I think they got it. With the 9th pick, the Colts select Deshaun Faith, defensive back out of the University of Colorado. Faith has arguably the best ball skills of any defensive back in this entire draft class. 8 interceptions as a senior. That was 2nd in the entire country. He's a little bit undersized, but he's a really solid cover corner, and obviously the ball skills are really impressive. Reminds me a lot of Trayvon Diggs or Xavier Howard. Yeah, they may not be the most consistent in coverage, but they know how to play the football. The Denver Broncos wrap up the top 10, selecting the top wide receiver off the board. It's Jordan Acuff II out of Florida State. There were a handful of receivers who I think could have been argued to be the top one off the board, but it ends up being Acuff. The best pure deep threat in the entire draft, ends up as an 81 overall, but only with normal development. 94 speed, this is somebody who can really stretch the field vertically, and I think he'll be a good complement along with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and Marvin Mims. The Green Bay Packers select Khaled Garrison, the running back out of Texas. The Heisman Trophy winner is off the board. He is headed up to Lambeau to play for the Packers. He might as well be the best football player in the entire draft. He is as complete as it gets for the running back position. He is an 83 overall, but what I like about him is that he's at least an 80 overall at all 3 archetypes. Garrison really checks off all the boxes. He's a tough, physical runner at 6'3", 230 pounds. He's probably the best receiving back in the entire draft. Great in terms of his ability to run routes and make plays after the catch. He's going to be one of the best running backs in the NFL in a very short time. With the 12th pick, the Washington Commanders select Junior Miro, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. He's a pretty talented player across the board, coming in with hidden development. The Commanders are a team who really has prioritized pass rush early and often in the first round over the last decade. And with guys like Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne getting older, it doesn't hurt to add more. Prince Johnson goes to the New York Jets here at pick 13, the Jets' second first-rounder of the day. They acquired this pick in the last episode from the Cleveland Browns in the Quinnen Williams deal. Johnson is going to be able to help shore up the offensive line, as it looks like the Jets, with their new head coach and new GM, are really trying to bulk up the trenches. The Los Angeles Chargers select Hakeem Clark, wide receiver out of Texas A&M, with the 14th pick. I really like this selection for the Chargers. They need a spark on that offense, and that's exactly what Hakeem Clark is. I think if you use him like Deebo Samuel as a guy who you craft touches for in creative ways, then he's going to be most effective. He may not be a guy who you trust to stretch the field vertically, running 30-yard post routes down the field, but in the short to intermediate game, get him the ball. Prince Nwoko, pass rusher out of USF, goes to the Las Vegas Raiders here at pick 15. 6 foot, 317 pounds. He has kind of an odd build, and he's a really impressive athlete for being over 300 pounds. I think his quickness off the edge is going to make him very tempting, and if he can develop more of a power element, he's going to be a beast. The Tennessee Titans are on the clock, and they are staying on the clock, but they're making another move. They're trading away Jeffrey Simmons to the Carolina Panthers for the 17th pick and DJ Johnson. Carolina really is missing one piece. That's some beef up front. They're getting that with Jeffrey Simmons, while the Titans are going to look to restart things now with back-to-back picks in the first round. They start with Roman Bishop, the edge rusher out of Florida State. With the Titans' new 4-3 defensive scheme, I think he's going to slide into defensive end, along with Harold Landry, who is also listed as a linebacker. Jeffrey Simmons is no longer a natural scheme fit, which is why they made the move, along with not wanting to give him a long-term extension. So Bishop is going to be one of the anchors of their defense, and now they're going to look to help the offensive side of the ball with Creighton King, the top guard off the board out of the University of Colorado. There's a handful of offensive linemen, specifically guards, who I think are going to go pretty soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a run on offensive linemen here in the back half of the first round. That'll bring up the first of our division rivals, the Seattle Seahawks, with the 18th pick. And speak of the devil, they go back to the offensive line. Rudig Salamone, the guard out of Oklahoma. I'm a little bit surprised he was the next offensive lineman off the board, but it's not a bad pick at all by Seattle. He's going to be able to start for them right away. Really, really solid athlete, and it certainly doesn't hurt that he is hidden development. A nice piece here for the Seahawks, who are looking to add some more talent up front. They clearly believe in quarterback Bryson Bowen, who they drafted in the 4th round a few years ago and was their starter last year, winning 9 games. So the Steelers are on the clock. However, we're looking to call Pittsburgh and make a move. There's a player we really want to get. We don't think he's going to fall to 25, and we're willing to give up a nice package to get this deal done. The St. Louis Dragons will be trading picks 25, 79 in the 3rd round, which we got last year on draft night from Washington, and a 7th. This is a lot to give up to move up just 6 spots, but I think it's worth it. So now the question is, what direction are the Dragons going to go in? Are we looking to add another skill position player to the offensive side of the ball? There's a handful of intriguing weapons, specifically Dejuan Carroll, along with these tight ends. Are we looking at the offensive line? It's no secret that's a need for us. Caleb Mabin and Mustafa Diaby, both were not supposed to fall this far. Or are we looking to get some help in the secondary with all these safeties? Is there one that we really want over the others? With the 19th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Salmondre Mack, guard, out of the University of Alabama. We're adding some beef up front to the offensive line with Salmondre Mack. We really have not invested high draft capital within the offensive line in this series, and I think it's no secret that we need to change that. We need help up front. The offensive line's been very inconsistent, whether it's been based on production or based on injury. We need to get a blue-chip talent at guard, and that's exactly what Salmondre Mack is. When you turn on the tape, it's pretty easy to see why the Dragons really like this kid. I think he's going to be a perfect culture fit. This is somebody who is a mauler in the run game. He is not afraid to get up in your face, and he will dominate big defensive linemen who are looking to make plays defending the run. He's a pretty good pass blocker as well, and I think he'll be an upgrade compared to what the Dragons have had there over guys like Ed Ingram and Kenyon Green. But the run blocking is really the strong asset of his game. He benched 41 reps on the bench, which led all offensive linemen during the combine this year. And I think it's his power is really what he wins with. He's a little bit undersized at 6 foot 307, but he makes it work. He's a 79 overall, so despite only having normal development, he looks really, really good. And he's a perfect example of my new draft class scaling, where there's going to be more players who are rated super highly and more players with normal development. He will battle with guys like Zach Tom and Royal Osuchua for starting spots. It's a good problem to have with all this depth on the offensive line, because that's been a big issue with our team over the last few years. And now we have multiple competent guards and multiple competent tackles off the bench. It's still foreseen to be whether Mack cracks the opening day starting lineup or not, but with all the injuries that we had last year, it's probably only a matter of time until he plays. Cornelius Reese, the top tight end off the board, goes to the Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews is gone. He signed with Carolina. Boom, here's your replacement. I think Reese is going to be a perfect plug-and-play fit here in Baltimore. I think he has a really similar skill set to a poor man's Mark Andrews. He's not a phenomenal blocker, though. I think he could look to improve there. But as a receiver, I think he's going to really be a big piece for them right away. Bobcat Charleston, linebacker out of Georgia, goes to the Dolphins. He's more of a traditional off-ball linebacker, so I think he's going to kick inside. He's an old-school thumping type of linebacker. Very physical, especially in the run game. Not a particularly good cover player. That's a big issue. But on the ground game, he is a monster. Dejuan Carroll, the wide receiver out of LSU, goes to the Philadelphia Eagles. Only normal development, but at 20 years old, there is plenty of room for him to grow. At 6'2", 220 pounds, I think Carroll's the most refined route runner of the top receivers in this class, and I think he's got the best hands and is arguably the best separator. Now we've got back-to-back division rivals, starting with the LA Rams, and they pick Caleb Maben, the edge rusher out of Florida. At one point in this season, Maben was the favorite to be the number 1 pick. His stock ended up slipping a little bit, although he made up for it with a great showing in the Combine. Still ends up here in the first round, going to the Rams, joining Aaron Donald and Josh Allen in what is one of the most fearsome pass rushes in the league. Carmelo Finnegan, defensive tackle out of Ohio State, goes to the Niners. So both LA and San Francisco saw us and Seattle beef up the offensive lines. So now these two teams are looking to beef up their defensive lines. Finnegan is a really intriguing player who I think has a lot of upside, adding to the ultra-talented Niners defensive front. The Pittsburgh Steelers select Seth Smith, tackle out of Boise State. Gets him another guy up front on the offensive line at just 21 years old. I think Smith is a really, really good pass protector, and I think he's got really solid long-term upside, and I think he's got a chance to be one of the better starting tackles in the league over time. That'll now bring us to the Minnesota Vikings, but not for long. We've got a trade. From the back end of the first round, it's the Atlanta Falcons, who are moving up 4 spots from pick 30 to 26. We've had a handful of moves here in the first round, and it's Atlanta to be the next team who moves up. These guys obviously beat us last year in the playoffs, lost in the conference championship, looking for the missing piece, and it's a tight end. Keanu Hokulani out of Miami is the pick. Now, I will say, Hokulani is a beast. He's an 80 overall, and without spoiling too much, he's one of, I think, only 3 players in this draft class who has superstar X Factor. This guy is a monster. So now that poses the question, how will him and Kyle Pitts both consistently see the field? Because both of these guys were high premium picks. Unless they're thinking of replacing Pitts, I don't know entirely how it's going to work. Interesting strategy from the Falcons. We'll see if it pays off. That'll bring us to the Cincinnati Bengals, really improved after a disappointing season 2 years ago, and they go with Mustafa Diaby, the edge rusher out of Arizona. Their defense was so much improved from last year to this season. Their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, was hired to be the new head coach of Tennessee, but they're still going to look to add to the defensive line, joining young pieces such as Miles Murphy and one of their 2 first-rounders from last year, Yoro Diallo. That'll bring us to the Kansas City Chiefs, and they will stick to the theme of defensive line with Alfie Bacon. He did not play a game this year for Minnesota due to injury, but his stock still went up after a jaw-dropping combine. This guy is an otherworldly athlete at 6'4", 370 pounds. The way he moves is unreal. Built very similarly to a guy like Jordan Davis. Quincy Carter, defensive tackle out of Clemson, goes to the Buffalo Bills. Again, sticking with the theme of defensive line. I think Carter's a really well-rounded player who will eventually be a 3-down defensive lineman. He can make plays in the run game. He can make plays as a pass rusher. I think he's really solid. Ukemi Watkins is off the board to the Minnesota Vikings. Watkins was a guy we were really high on, and if we were unable to get Samandre Mack, Watkins would have become our number 1 target. During the draft preview, I said that he really reminds me a lot of Isaiah Simmons with his size, athleticism, and versatility. And ironically, Isaiah Simmons plays for the Minnesota Vikings. So it's very fitting that they now have Ukemi Watkins, a lot of versatile chess pieces on that defense, and I'm really excited to see how they use them. Last year's Super Bowl teams are now up to wrap up round 1, and that'll start with the Super Bowl loser, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they go with Prabhakara Claude, the edge rusher out of Navy. He's only a 73 overall, but he's one of the youngest players in the draft at just 20 years old, adding another piece to the front unit for the Jacksonville Jaguars. At one point in time, it looked like he was going to go in the top 10. His stock slipped a little bit, but he's still a first-rounder. To round out round 1, the Cowboys select a quarterback, Connor Canyon, out of South Carolina. This might be the most fascinating pick of the day so far. So you're probably wondering why the Cowboys are drafting a quarterback. Well, Dak Prescott, rating-wise, has regressed a lot. He's gone down to an 82 overall. He's 33 years old. And the Cowboys roster does not have a ton of holes. they realize that they probably only have 2, maybe 3 more really good seasons with Dak, and they like Connor Kenyon enough to be his long-term replacement. At just 21 years old, I think Kenyon's got a lot of upside, and the Cowboys are playing the long game with this selection. So that'll wrap up what ended up being a super interesting first round. A lot of surprises for sure. Limoni Tuliesi goes number 1 to the Bucs, the tackle out of Oregon. We had 2 quarterbacks go in the first round, both of which are now with the NFC East. The Giants trade up for Stanley Cubbage Jr., while the Cowboys, in the most surprising move of the day, select Connor Kenyon. As for our Dragons, we move up in the first round to select Samandre Mack, who we believe might be the best offensive lineman in the draft. That'll bring us into the second round now. Still a lot of talent on the board. There's a lot of linemen on both sides of the ball, a lot of talent in the secondary. Got to assume the Dragons certainly have safety high on their radar coming up. We're going to move quicker now that we're out of the first round as the Bucs go back to the offensive line with Kerry Vialia. He's a guy who definitely would have been on our radar had we not selected Samandre Mack. Griffin Ofenlock goes to the Jets. Pretty good pick. Braxton Merkenberg, wide receiver out of Washington, to the Patriots. You know New England can't help themselves. When they see a white wide receiver on the board, they got to pick him. Merkenberg is probably going to line up in the slot for New England, although he's not built like your prototypical slot receiver because he's 6'6". He's a physical jump ball receiver, but he wins inside. Now, he does not win with speed and quickness. Only 82 speed. He's the slowest receiver in the entire league, but the Patriots are hoping that won't be an issue. The Bears go with Kamari Banks, the second Oklahoma State defensive back off the board. Eric Abodije, edge rusher out of West Virginia, to the Lions. Another guy who was on our radar. We didn't think he'd make it to our second rounder, and now he's off the board. Asher Kritz, tackle out of Alabama, goes to the Broncos. Roman Foster, one of the youngest players in the draft at safety, goes to the Houston Texans. So the Texans get arguably the 2 best safeties in the entire draft. Another safety ends up off the board. Tyrell Legend out of North Carolina to the Saints. Now we're starting to get a run on safeties. Could the Dragons look to move up again? Carter Davis out of Washington goes to the Colts. The Giants select Corbin Sheffield, the white corner out of Oklahoma. And then the Packers pick a quarterback, Johnny Gordon, out of LSU. So this is really interesting because Jordan Love has played pretty well over the last few seasons, but Jordan Love is not currently under contract. The Packers seemed very hesitant on paying him. He wasn't signed in free agency. I imagine there's going to be a handful of teams, including Green Bay, who potentially look to bring him in during the preseason. But they're clearly not committed to him long-term as they select Johnny Gordon to potentially be their franchise quarterback. The Commanders select Ryan Walling, the tackle out of Florida State. The Browns, with their first pick of the day, are going to look to help out their young quarterback by adding a pass catcher. Jacob Harrison Jr. out of Central Michigan, the Biletnikoff winner, who had over 1,800 receiving yards as a junior for the Chippewas. Dutch Koldyke is off the board here to the Chargers. Rudy Baskett to the Raiders. DeClane Williamson, running back out of Oregon, to the Titans. The Derrick Henry era is over in Tennessee. They let him go after 10 seasons. He's currently unsigned in free agency, and now they're going to pair up Williamson with Tajay Spears in the backfield. The Lions get Jalen Butler, the linebacker out of Duke. Seattle picks running back Nigel Palarco out of Minnesota. You know the Seahawks couldn't help themselves with a day 2 running back on the board, could you? Audley Boozer, tight end out of Ohio State, to the Steelers. Billing Boney, guard out of Mississippi State, to the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's a really good value pick for them. Darius El Hadid, cornerback out of Memphis, to the Dolphins. He's an 80 overall. He's also 24 years old. He has absurd ball skills with 10 interceptions as a senior with the Tigers. And despite the fact that he's an older prospect, he's an absurdly talented one who should be a mainstay in this Dolphins secondary for years to come. One of the most fun players in the entire draft, and I've also got to point out, the Dragons are coming up soon. Curtis Troy goes to the Eagles. The New York Jets select Shamar Watson-Lansdale, and the Baltimore Ravens will select Zazavian Proctor, the cornerback out of Florida. So the Dragons are on the board now. We decided not to move up. We're going to hold tight. Now, we could always look to move down, but there are a lot of good players still on the board. A lot of safeties here at the top. Is this finally where the Dragons address safety, or do they look somewhere else? Good skill position players, good pass rushers, good offensive linemen, all still on the board. We've got a lot of choices here. With the 25th pick in the second round of the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select defensive back Jalen Bourgeois, safety out of UCLA. So finally, the Dragons get their safety, and it's the ultra-talented and versatile Jalen Bourgeois, who comes in with hidden development. I'm really excited to have this guy on our team. He's a player who we didn't really look at until late in the pre-draft process, but we came away very impressed with the film. He was great during the NFL Combine, and I think he's going to be a really fun piece in the back end of their secondary. This is a guy who can do it all. He's got the natural instincts to make plays in the backfield as a blitzer going after the quarterback or in run defense. I think he's got pretty solid ability in coverage as well. He can line up with tight ends. He's big and physical enough to handle that. He's quick enough to cover against running backs, and his ball skills have really improved throughout his 4-year career at UCLA. He's a really impressive athlete, ran a 4.43 at the Combine, and finished in the top 4 in 5 of the 6 drills amongst strong safeties. His improvement since his freshman year with the Bruins has been very notable, and I think he's going to be a great fit on our defense. He is 23 years old, which is a little on the older side, but I think he's got a chance to be a day one starter for us. He'll compete with a handful of guys we've got currently in the back end. I don't know if he's going to play strong safety or a free safety yet, because Samasone Saluni, who we drafted in the second round last year, is also more of a natural strong safety. But I think the versatility that Bourgeois has could lead him to being productive at either spot. I can't wait to see the impact he makes on our defense, and I think he's going to be a really fun player for us. Let's wrap up the rest of the second round as the Vikings go with another safety, Hezekiah Harbor out of Florida State. More safeties off the board. Jaden Nelson goes to the Chargers. The Saints add to the offensive line with Bradley Perlmont. And the Bills pick a quarterback, Royce Ramsey out of Middle Tennessee State, one of the biggest draft risers of the season. Going into the year, he was really not on anybody's radar, but he had a great season for the Blue Raiders and ends up here in the second round to Buffalo, who has Josh Allen. I guess they want a long-term stable backup for him. Sebastian Pazzuello goes to the Atlanta Falcons, a big-bodied physical receiver out of Oregon State. So interestingly, Atlanta's drafted 2 pass catchers today, both of whom are at least 6'4". They're adding big physical pass catchers because I guess they don't feel good with the guys they have. That's kind of odd. They used top 10 picks on Kyle Pitts and Drake London, but the reason why they're doing this is because they're trading one of those guys. They don't want to pay Kyle Pitts, and because of that, he's on the move. Travis Kelce just retired, and the Kansas City Chiefs want in. Now, they're going to give up a lot to get him, but dear God, Kyle Pitts will now be catching passes from Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs are going to give up their 3rd rounder, their 2nd next year, and offensive tackle Wanya Morris. It's a nice haul here for Atlanta, getting all that for a guy they don't want to pay. But now Kyle Pitts is in that Kansas City offense. Dear God. Bautista Maldonado, the tight end out of San Diego State, will wrap up the second round. Pretty interesting round for sure as the Dragons decide to stay put, and they go with Jalen Bourgeois, the talented safety out of UCLA. We had some surprises after that pick, with the Bills selecting a quarterback, Royce Ramsey, along with the Falcons trading away Kyle Pitts to the Kansas City Chiefs. We were never in on the Pitts sweepstakes. We just gave Isaiah Likely $60 million, so that would not make sense for us because we don't run a lot of 12 personnel. Going into round 3 now, we still have our own 3rd, 25th overall in the round. We, of course, traded our top 3rd rounder earlier today to move up and get some Andre Mack. Chip Links, a linebacker out of Miami, stays in Florida. He's going to the Bucks. Williamson Wilson, drafted by the Browns. Dragon Lansstone to the New England Patriots. Levante Monk, wide receiver out of UConn. I think that's a great pick for the Bears. Gregor Kaliglane goes to Detroit. Levelin Brown Jr., another guy I really like, ends up in Denver. Quintino Correale goes to the Texans. Finley Harrison to the Saints. Cole Palmer finally off the board to the Colts. A.J. Price ends up with the Denver Broncos. Green Bay selects Cap Crew, wide receiver out of LSU. This is a great pick for the Packers, as Crew's going to come in as an 80 overall. Another big slot, if you will, at 6'4". He's more of a natural fit inside. The Packers have really made their offense better today, drafting the 2 best skill position players in the entire draft, ratings-wise, with the running back Khaled Garrison, now wide receiver Cap Crew. A lot of weapons through their new quarterback, Johnny Gordon. Great draft so far for Green Bay. Nicolo Mazzetti ends up in Pittsburgh with the Steelers. Nate Felder to the Browns. That's a nice pick. The Chargers get F.A. Okulado. J.J. Thompson to the Raiders. The Titans get Devontae Bridges out of Florida State. The Panthers, with their first pick of the day, get Roosevelt Meadows. Kyer Moss goes to the Packers. Kai Kamaka to the Steelers. The Ravens get Bailey Whitfield. The Dolphins selected Maya Reyes out of Penn State. The Eagles get a running back, Tyler Sanders from Mississippi State. The Rams with a great pick selecting Alex Weldy Jr., the safety out of Temple. He's a versatile defensive back who can play both safety spots along with slot corner. He's very undersized, though, only 5'10", 175. The Rams clearly not deferred by his small stature. They think that this kid can play, and I think they're right. At 78 overall, he's one of the highest-rated players left on the board. The 49ers select linebacker Saul Tanpepper, and that'll bring us to the Dragons with the 25th pick in the round. Again, we decide not to move up here because, simply put, there really aren't many players in this projected range that I'm all that interested in. Even here with this pick, there aren't a ton of natural fits for us on the board, and because of that, we're going to look to move back. The New Orleans Saints call us, and we are going to strike a deal. We're going to move back 15 spots out of the third round entirely and acquire their fourth rounder. We're also going to get a fourth rounder next year while swapping sevens. We'll give them our seventh next year. They will give us their seventh this year. So we add 2 additional picks this season, and we flip a seventh into a fourth. Pretty good value deal in my opinion. Clearly the Saints have the guy that they really want if they're going to trade 2 fourths to move up just 15 spots. We'll see what direction they choose to go with as they select Darnell Cannon Jr., the edge rusher out of Michigan, another Wolverine joining the Saints. Ty Jackson to the Vikings. Lake Holloman to the Bengals. He's a really fun player. Fiasco Casablanca to Atlanta. Lucius DeLead finally off the board. He goes to the Bills. Lance DiNardo to the Falcons. Jace Fears to the Jaguars. He is also a 78. Perfect complement to Travis Etienne. And they're both Clemson guys. And then Carlito Loco ends up as the final pick of the third to the Dallas Cowboys. So an uneventful third round for the Dragons. We don't add anybody here as we choose to move back. And we now have an additional selection in the fourth round. Some pretty good picks here. Cap Crew, the best in my opinion, coming in as an 80 overall. The lone 80 left on the board. Some other good players going as well, and now that brings us into day 3. Now, there are still some really highly rated players left on the board. As part of my new rating scale, I wanted there to be more day 3 gems. Every year, we get a handful of guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Puka Nacua who really dominate coming into the league as day 3 picks. Badger Hawkins goes to the Buccaneers, Draymond Rock to the Jets, and here you go, case in point. He's a 78 overall, tied for the highest rated player left on the board. The Jets just got one of the best football players in the entire draft here at tight end in the fourth round. Hendon Clearwater goes to the Patriots. The Bears get Donovan Smart, tight end out of Georgia. The Buccaneers get another tight end, Zachary Armstrong. A lot of tight ends going off the board. Jacoby McNeil goes to the Broncos, and the Texans select quarterback out of Ole Miss, Cameron Fisk, the 5th QB off the board. That'll bring us to the Dragons here with the 6th pick in the 4th round. The guy I would have picked with our 3rd rounder is still there. I had a feeling he would make it this far, and ultimately our judgment proved to be correct. With the 6th pick in the 4th round of the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Nnamdi Sanaga, edge rusher out of the University of Washington. So the Dragons are going to add to the pass rush. Nnamdi Sanaga is the selection. He's a really interesting player coming in at 6'4", 265 pounds. The quickness and burst he has off the edge is really impressive. He's a really good athlete who really relies on his quickness. His pass rushing toolbox is a little bit inconsistent, and he's a little up and down as a run defender, but I like the athletic profile with him, and I think he'll be able to start off as a rotational pass rusher, and hopefully we can develop him like we've been able to progress other players like Trajan Blyshenden and BJ Ojulari throughout this series. I think Sanaga is a little bit of a tweener. At 6'4", 265 pounds, I think he's got the athleticism to play with his hand out of the dirt. We run a lot of 4-3 packages, though, and I don't know if he necessarily has the strength right now to match up with NFL offensive tackles, especially in the ground game. He needs to play with more power. He needs to add some strength, and if he does, I think he's going to be really good. At just 22 years old, he's got plenty of time to improve that area of his game, because other than adding some strength, the rest of his player profile looks really good, and I'm excited to add Sanaga to the defense. The Colts add cornerback Damian Henderson out of Texas A&M. The Giants pick wide receiver Emery Lavelle, who is a total beast. 78 overall with hidden development. I thought about him, but I don't think he's a natural fit for our offense because we have a lot of primary slot guys already, like Griffin Weaver III and Arturo Modelo. But damn, we might have missed out on a great player. He looks like another gem who I talked about coming into the 4th round. More day 3 gems. Emery LaVale looks like he's going to be one of the best slot receivers in the NFL in no time. The Green Bay Packers have had a phenomenal draft, and they make another solid pick with Jamal James, the safety out of USC. Of Andre Bowman to the Commanders. The Browns select Bradley Miles. Marvin Deallian, quarterback out of Minnesota, to the Chargers. And then the Raiders go with another QB in Valentino Maldonado. The Panthers with back-to-back picks. I like their selection of tight end Chasen Spiegel. The Seahawks with back-to-back picks, adding to the offensive line with both of them. Melvin Strawn finally off the board of the Broncos. Yaya Uzoma goes to the Miami Dolphins. Kai Famuina to the Cleveland Browns. He's a player we liked a lot. Kind of unfortunate he's off the board. Remember, we did not have an original 4th rounder right here from Carolina because we used it to go out and trade for B.J. Ojulari, a deal that has turned out to be a really good one for us. Chase Gentry out of UConn to the Bengals, 77 overall running back. Back-to-back picks for the Bengals where they draft players out of UConn. So I guess the Bengals are building a little bit of a Connecticut pipeline. You normally don't see all these UConn players entering the NFL, but they've really built a good football program over the last few seasons. And Chase Gentry, the heart of their offense, ends up with the Bengals as a 77. Fullweight Bandara to the Chiefs. Alessio DiCarlo to the Bills. Burrow Magneto to the Vikings. And then we wrap up the 4th round with Miguel Salazar out of Texas, staying in the Lone Star State, going to the Cowboys. That'll bring us into the 5th round. A lot of talent still on the board after a pretty fun 4th round. Our Dragons stay put with the 8th pick in the round, selecting Nnamdi Sanaga, the edge rusher out of Washington. It does hurt me a little bit to draft a Washington Husky, being an Oregon football fan, but I'm not going to let my bias go through how good of a player I think Nnamdi Sanaga can be, and I'm really excited to add him to the defense. I think this area of the draft is really where we can start to win because we've got a number of day 3 picks and quite a few players we like still on the board. Our next selection is our own 5th rounder, 25th in the round. Dwayne Carter finally off the board. He was supposed to go a lot earlier than this, ending up in Baltimore with the Ravens. Zantrez Miller out of Alabama. I liked him a lot. He goes to the Detroit Lions. Benedict Del Fritz to the Giants. Zadarius Barkley to the Texans. Julio Montero was my next target. He goes to the Saints. We might have ended up dodging a bullet. Montero's like a 63 overall, one of the lowest rated players in the entire draft, so thank you, New Orleans. Allen Givens II became our new target. He goes to Washington, and unfortunately this time we do miss out on a really good player. Givens ended up being a 74. After that, I wanted Eli Willis, the tight end, but he goes to the Chargers. He ended up being a 70. The Seahawks pick another running back, Razir McClendon, and naturally he's better than the running back they drafted in the 2nd round. Few picks to go now. The Niners select Giovenzo Ferrari. That's a fire name. And that'll bring us to the Dragons here with the 25th pick in the 5th round. We've ended up with a lot of 5th round picks over the last 2 years. This season it looks like we're only going to have one. We're going to stick and pick as there's a guy I like still on the board. With the 25th pick in the 5th round at the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Trey Flynn, cornerback out of the University of Tennessee. I think Flynn's an interesting player because he's a good cover corner. He's got good size and length. There's one noticeable problem with him. He's slow as hell. He ran a 4.64 40-yard dash. Of the 45 corners who ran this year at the Combine, his 40 time was 45th. He's the slowest cornerback in the draft, and the rest of his athleticism really is not all that good either. He doesn't necessarily have great short area quickness, which is a little bit of a concern, but I think he makes up for it with his super long arms. He has a 6'5 wingspan at 6'1. I think the ball skills are pretty solid as well. That's a good area of his game, and he's pretty good in coverage despite not having great quickness. The hope is that he'll be able to mask that issue in the NFL, and I think with his big frame, he's got a shot to do it. If nothing else, he'll be good cornerback depth, and I do worry about him, especially against bigger physical receivers who are going to be able to match up with his size, who are a lot more athletic than him. But against smaller receivers, if he's just more physical than them, I think he'll be able to make it work. I think he could be a safety long term. He is a better man corner than zone player, which is why maybe he'd be a tough transition to safety, but I think he's got the size and build for it. Let's round out the 5th round now. Jackson Sanders goes to the Bills. Crocker to the Falcons. The Jaguars add Armani Forrest, a quarterback out of Clemson. That's a pretty fun pick. And then Dallas wraps things up with Jim Temquez-Toloco, the edge rusher out of Oklahoma. So that'll wrap up the 5th round. Again, we stand pat, adding to the secondary with Trey Flynn, the cornerback out of Tennessee. So now we have 3 more picks to go here going into the final 2 rounds. There's still a handful of players who I like on the board, and I think we've got an opportunity to get some potential gems here late in this year's draft. That'll start with round 6. Currently, we own 1/6 and 2/7. So here come the early picks. We've got our first fullback off the board. Henry McCutcheon to the Patriots. I think that's a good pick. The Lions are on the clock, but not for long. We're going to trade both of our 7th rounders, 200 and 222, to move up to the 165th pick. I'm normally against moving up on day 3 because I feel like at this stage in the draft, you're just using lottery tickets, and the best chance to get good players is to have as many lottery tickets as possible. However, given the circumstances here, there's 2 guys left on the board who I really like, and I want to make those 2 a priority. I don't want to risk losing out. With the 165th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select wide receiver Aaron Mayer out of the University of Southern California. I'm really surprised he fell to the 6th round, and we're not going to let him fall any longer as he ends up being our selection. We don't have a ton of depth at wide receiver, only 5 guys on the roster. I don't think we have a receiver right now taller than 6 foot other than Jamison Williams. We need some more size, and that's exactly what Aaron Mayer brings at 6'3", 203 pounds. He's a physical receiver who wins on the outside. Good jump ball receiver. He's a really good separator for his size and has very good body control. He doesn't necessarily have the greatest athleticism. He's not the fastest. He's not the most athletic. He's not the most dynamic with the ball in his hands. But it's his physicality on the outside that I think really lets him win. We have prioritized receivers who are a little bit smaller but have great short area quickness and are really good with the ball in their hands. We needed a different profile of receiver. That's what we're getting here with Aaron Mayer, who ends up as a 74 overall. So indeed, he really should not have fallen out of the 3rd or 4th round, which is where he was supposed to go. He falls in the 6th. We realize that he shouldn't still be on the board, and we go move up and get him. I think that's going to be a really good pick for us. I think his skill set is something that we don't have, and I'm excited to add him to the team. So now we only have 1 more pick to go. That is our 6th round selection, 18th in the round. Ario Zoom is a really good pick to the Broncos, a wide receiver. He ended up being a 75 overall. Garrett Pace Jr. goes to the Browns. Okobo Brown goes to the Chargers. That's a really good pick. Elias Wilson to the Titans. He's a super fun player, the running back out of Syracuse. And that brings us to our final pick of the day. As I said earlier, there's still 1 more guy I really wanted, and that player, lucky for us, is still on the board. With the 18th pick of the 6th round in the 2026 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Franklin Headliner, running back out of North Texas. We waited until the end of the draft to add to the offensive skill positions, but we pick a wide receiver early in the round and now a running back to finish things off. I think Franklin Headliner is going to give us a good, well-rounded skill set to add to the running back room. Headliner is a 4-year starter with the North Texas Mean Green. Since his true freshman season, he has been a star for this offense, finishing his collegiate career with 4,500 yards from scrimmage and over 40 total touchdowns. He's one of the most accomplished players in North Texas history, and he ends up coming off the board here in the 6th round. He's a talented runner who I think specializes in early down situations, but I think he can also make plays as a receiver as well. We've seen some upside there. At 6 foot, 214 pounds, I think he's got good athleticism, good burst, good quickness, tested pretty well at the combine. And I think adding more depth to the backfield is going to do as well. I'm curious to see if he's able to get a role this season as potentially our 3rd running back. He'll challenge Tornado Davis, who we drafted last year, for snaps. So that's our last pick of the day. There isn't really anybody else who I'm super interested in drafting. There are a few guys who I have my eye on as undrafted free agents, but I think our draft is done. So we're going to simulate through the rest of the draft. We will start by taking a look here at round 6, in which we add 2 players Aaron Mayer, the wide receiver out of USC, and Franklin Headliner, the running back out of North Texas. No skill position players for us until the 6th round. I feel like our skill position players last year were really good, and I didn't want to prioritize them early over helping the offensive line, the defensive line, or the secondary, because those were bigger needs for us. As for the 7th round, we went into the day with multiple 7ths, and we end up with none. As you'll see here, there's a handful of pretty good players who went. A lot of the receivers kind of slipped a little bit, such as Aaron Mayer. So you're going to notice some pretty good receivers here in the 6th and 7th rounds. The highest player picked in round 7 was a 73 overall, Eddie Cranberry Jr. to the Chicago Bears, along with Samuel Bible, another receiver, to the Atlanta Falcons. Overall, I think we had a really good draft. We only ended up with 6 picks, which is less than we normally have, but I think we did a really good job of getting value and filling out our needs. So Mondre Mack and Jalen Bourgeois are both going to compete to be starters right away, and I think we made good use of our top 2 selections. Nnamdi Sanaga is another guy I expect to play a lot early on, and then I think Trey Flynn, Aaron Mayer, and Franklin Headliner should give us some good depth. We only ended up with 1 player having hit in development, that being Bourgeois, but again, with my new rating scale, there's going to be more players like that. Some other notable draft classes I want to highlight include the Giants, who only ended up with 5 picks, but they did a really good job, particularly with their new quarterback-receiver tandem of Stanley Cubbage Jr. and Emery Lavelle. The Jets, in year 1 of a new regime, did a really good job. They had a lot of early picks, and I think they made the most. They really wanted to beef up the trenches. You win games at the line of scrimmage, and they really focused on the offensive and defensive lines while getting a steal with tight end Draymond Rock in the 4th round. I don't know if there was a single bigger winner than the Packers. They got 2 of the best offensive players in the entire class with Khaled Garrison and Cap Crew. Johnny Gordon, I think, could very well be the franchise quarterback, 73 overall with hidden development. And I thought the depth they got down the board was also really good. The next team I want to highlight is the Baltimore Ravens. They've lost a handful of players like Ronnie Stanley and Mark Andrews since the start of last season, and they've done a good job replacing their holes, getting great value early with guys like Cornelius Reese, Billing Boney, and Zazavion Proctor. Good organizations stay winning. The Texans got Pip Smalling, who I think might be the best player in the draft. They also got Roman Foster. I don't know how those guys are going to play together, but I'm sure the Texans have a plan. One of those guys probably moving out to strong safety. The Bears only drafted 1 player lower than 70, being a 69. They did a great job of finding value up and down the entire draft board. The Broncos did a great job adding to the offense early with Jordan Acuff and Asher Kritz. They also really improved the defensive line in round 3. The Buccaneers obviously have the number 1 pick with Mimoni Tuliesi, and I think a lot of guys drafted after him are going to prove to be better, but Tuliesi is the best offensive tackle in the draft, and you got to protect your young quarterback. Hakeem Clark was one of my favorite picks of the day to the Chargers, who also did a great job of consistently finding depth. The Dolphins drafted great value, especially defensively. 5 of their 6 picks were on the defensive side of the ball. Bobcat Charleston and Darius El Hadid are going to play big roles for them early on, and that just about does it for our draft. Let's take a look at our schedule before we wrap up the episode. Take a look at what we'll be working with for Season 4. Being that now we're a pretty good team, we got a lot more primetime games, which is pretty fun. We're going to start the year at home for Week 1. First time we've played Week 1 at home this entire series, and it'll be against the Las Vegas Raiders. We have a short week after that, Week 2, Thursday night against the Detroit Lions, and then 2 weeks later, Thursday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks. We then return home Monday night against the Niners. 3 of our first 5 games are on primetime. And then Week 9, Monday night again against San Francisco. So we play them twice on Monday night within the span of a month. After that, we play the Rams twice, sandwiched in between a trip to Jerry's World, Sunday Night Football against the Cowboys, and then we finish things off at Arrowhead against the Chiefs. And then our final home game is Week 18 against Callaghan October and the New Orleans Saints. Hopefully October and Puma Whitlock stay healthy this time, because the first time we got to see those two play against each other, well, neither of them were healthy. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. Let me know what you thought of our draft down below in the comments. Next episode, we're going to kick off this season, going through the preseason, and more importantly, Week 1 at home against the Raiders. That'll wrap up the episode. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.